me scanned at Brighton Digital Festival recently. Okay? No, it's better without.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, cool.
Then if you doze, no one else will notice. Feel free. I was being scanned at Brighton Digital Festival recently, and they made a little printed 3D bill to take home, which was very nice of them. I was an army of bills, like York, and I want to take over the world. And also, for me, it asks a big question about digital preservation, which is in 100 years' time, when my family wants to make a 500-metre statue of me in precious metal to commemorate my many achievements on the earth, which I'm sure they will. How are they going to get their hands on that mesh to make it accurate? Yeah. How are they going to make sure that 500 years' time they can read that file and they can print out using their super nano printers of the time? And unless you can answer that question, you don't know anything about digital preservation. And of course the answer is, we can't have a clue what's going on. Which means, of course, all the wonderful things we're working on now will just be dusty bits on the hard drives of history in 10, 20, 30 years' time, and no one will know how to access them unless you think about the future as you're building them. That's just to cheer you up. So I was asked to do this partly because I'm an old friend of Liz's, actually entirely because I'm an old friend of Liz's, and I was available. I have no other skill than being relatively cheap and relatively flexible and willing to sit in a dark room for a day. So that's it. You want to do the gig next year? Feel free. It is lots of fun though. So I was brought along to do this, and I get distracted easily, and on the way back from the conference I got distracted by this. And this is a photograph taken in the tube of an advert, and this is why an Apple computer is over. If you own shares in Apple, sell them now. If you care about Apple, it's finished. That is an iPhone 5C, the cheap one, colourable, in a case. The case is manufactured by Apple. You notice something about the case manufactured by Apple to go on the Apple product called the iPhone. Hom. Steve Jobs would never have let that happen. That is shoddy at a very low level, immediately avoidable, should have been picked up so far down the production line that can not only get into production but appear in an advert, tells you everything you need to know about the loss of control under Tim Cook. Apple's over. Okay? You've heard it here. Well, maybe 5 years ago. Last year I started by quoting Joan Didion, who I love beyond measure, and her line, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, because all that's happening, all that you are doing, all that we really do is telling stories, and finding new ways to tell stories and to engage people with the stories we tell. Construct something that passes for a narrative out of a fragmented reality that we construct out of the sense data that our imperfect senses grant us access to. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. So how are we going to tell those stories tomorrow when new technologies become available to us? And all I can do in this 30-minute session is really offer you some signposts on the map that you're already drawing. So in a sense, there is a room-sized map here. It's not quite the Borgesian map the size of the territory, but it's still a pretty impressive room-sized map of the space within which interactive documentaries and transmedia and storytelling happen with the assistance of these astonishing technologies that are becoming available to us. And on that room-sized map, based on what I heard on Tuesday, I just want to put down some pointers and give you some thoughts. Because the systems that we have access to now are themselves so complex that the methods through which we can tell stories require stories in order to explain not only how they work, but how we might use them. There is the story of the user guide to an interactive narrative is in itself another interactive narrative, telling you how to engage with the interactive narrative that you want to use to hear the story you thought you wanted to use. Now that may not be sustainable, frankly. And it may not be sustainable because the old stuff hasn't gone away while the new stuff exists within it. It was Locke who talked about interactive documentaries rather than transmedia. And it was interesting that Gruff Rhys from Super Furry Animals at the end, in his interesting piece of performance art, said this isn't a transmedia project, there's no intersections between the different formats. It's a book, it's a film, it's a record. And that media co-presence is quite important. The boundaries are not blurring in the way that perhaps some people thought they would, but rather these worlds coexist, and we have to deal with the fact that the book, as a finished object, bound, printed, sold in shops, exists in the same world as old CD-ROMs, as modern interactive works. And so what bleeds over between them may not be deliberate and absolutely won't be under our control as authors or editors. Now, what someone who reads a book and then engages with that similar narrative in a film or in an interactive documentary, we don't know what's happening in the space inside their head where these things. It is the fact that if you see the film before the book, you get a very different experience than seeing the book before the film. So it's not even a linear relationship. And I think we need to think more and more about that, about the stuff that's happening outside our control. And that, again, was one of the themes that I thought came over quite strongly. And of course, the technological tsunami continues, things move forward. So Google Glass is still, a bit hipsterish, a bit odd, a bit wanky, but it's out there, and more people are using it. And as a way of telling a story, this is my colleague and producer Gareth Mitchell, projecting a narrative into that little rectangle of perspex above his right eye is just as much a way of telling a story as doing it on a smartphone screen or anywhere else. And we will find ways to tell stories that engage with that. And of course, we'll find ways to tell stories that use multiple devices like that, or even have Gareth feeding back using the camera live into some sort of narrative that's being experienced by someone else. So even as we have to cope with the fact we haven't thrown away all the old media, everybody at the conference seems to be thinking about how do we engage with the new possibilities that are coming down as well. And that means there is just more stuff to be done and more stuff to understand. And you're faced with what mathematicians call a combinatorial explosion. In fact, if you have two options for telling a story, there are two options. If you have three, there are three different ways they can interact. If you have four, there are 12, 5, it increases massively. Once you have an option within a project of using 5 or 6 different methods to move the narrative forward or to engage with a member of the audience, end audience, then you have hundreds of different possibilities to choose from, and they all work in different ways and will result in different outcomes, or might. How many of those threads do you want to work through? It's like a choose your adventure game in which every page has a choice. If you have 20 choices, you've got 2 to 20 pages, that's a very big book. It's bigger even than the Book of Prize winner. So how do you engage with those things? And of course, we also live in a world where strange things happen unexpectedly. For example, every now and then, a bunch of people sitting in a conference are persuaded to dance to a video of puppet vegetables. This was, I filmed this on Tuesday. For those of you who weren't present, rather than Nicky Agrawal decided to get a little bit of audience participation. And so they showed the video and they taught us all the dance moves. I won't ask for a repeat. Can I just say that the sense of British embarrassment in was astonishing. You could smell it. However, fortunately, there are enough people who aren't stymied by having been brought up in the British education system for some real participation in dancing to go on as well. So I think this is significant. So strange things happen. And I think that sort of stirred things up a little bit as well, because the Agrawals were definitely taking a very different perspective on what's going on here from the rest of us. But again, they were about telling a story. And their mission was very clearly a combination of we like to be influential and we believe in good nutrition and helping kids make good choices. And that came very strongly in what they've done, but in a way that involved glove puppets rather than, say, high-resolution displays. So last year, the 3 big points, I think, that came out from the conversation and also came out were that a good story needs a hinterland. It needs to be located within a territory. That it doesn't stand alone. Because those stories that do stand alone don't have the legs, if you like, to support all of the narrative devices that are now available with interactive technologies. The agency that making the person who is experiencing the story feel they have a sense of agency within it, that choices can be made and those choices matter in some way, is the new black. It's the thing that you need to aim for, but as somebody pointed out, if you can fake agency, it's a lot cheaper. So if you can make people feel they're involved, but not actually go to the trouble of allowing them to be involved, you can really cut down on the number of narrative choices. You can cut through the combinatorial explosion, like Alexander cutting the Gordian knot, and you can actually get something that fits on a single DVD. So there is this sense of, well, how far do you have to be honest with your audience and with your users? And then the other thing, that making a story from one medium work in a wider context can be very hard. Taking a book, turning it into something else is hard. History is good. This was one of the themes from last year, that grounding narratives in real stories, but of course that's because a history has the hinterland. It comes with it. You don't need to make it up. You don't need to be Tolkien spending 30 years toiling at Oxford University to construct the fictional world. You can actually just mildly fictionalize the real world. And all these things, I think matter quite a lot. The thing that I thought was different this year from last year, and I think is reflected in what Paul's been trying to do with you today, is that there are two approaches to new opportunities, new information. According to Jean Piaget, that's in the glasses, the child psychologist, we can either assimilate new data into our existing cognitive frameworks, so we can make sense of it given what we already think we know. Okay, so we can learn something new about someone. Might be that, oh, they can play the piano. So if I learn that Peter can play the piano, which I suspect he can rather well, that's not really a surprise. Okay? Fantastic. If I learn that Peter is actually a werewolf, right, I can't just assimilate that into my understanding of Peter as a human being. I need to accommodate it by changing my whole framework, standing a bit further away from him, noting the fact today is in fact a full moon, and making sure I'm out of here before dark. And that's a much bigger cognitive shift. I'm accommodating new information by shifting the way in which I model the world. I have to model a world in which there are werewolves, whereas before there weren't. And one of the things that came through to me on Tuesday was there's a lot of accommodation going on at the moment. That organizations and creatives and audiences are getting used to this new stuff, not just by fitting it into how it used to be, oh, this is just like that, but by taking on the challenge of reconstructing the media space within which they operate. And that is a big shift, and it is a hard thing to do. Because in a new framework, some old things become unknowable. One of the reasons you don't have access to your childhood memories beyond the age of 3 or whatever is because your brain is completely restructured. If you do think you have access, what you're really doing, most people think, is just rehearsing. You have rehearsed a memory and brought it into the new structures. But your brain is so different from how it was when you were an infant that the chance that you've actually got direct access to those memory structures from those days really, really slim. So it is with the projects that people are starting to build now. You don't necessarily have access to the way it used to be, and audiences will not necessarily engage in the ways that they used to because their structures are different. Now that is an amazing opportunity because it means some stuff can be left to go. But it's also quite difficult because it means that, as with the constant quest for what is this thing called, is it transmedia, interaction, what is the thing that we're trying to do here called? So some of the old paths towards it may no longer be useful or may no longer have explanatory value. And in a few talks that I think became quite clear. I was reminded of an essay by Umberto Eco that he wrote in a book back 20 years ago now called Travels in Hyperreality. And it's a very good book. And Eco travels up and down the west coast of North America, visiting wax museums. And in particular, he's interested in wax models of Da Vinci's Last Supper. And the apotheosis of these is in the Hollywood Wax Museum. And Eco points out that in all of these wax museums, the thing that is claimed is that what you get in the museum is better than the original. Because not only is it in 3 dimensions and in colour, there's more of it. And this makes it superior to the crumbling fresco in Italy. You can get your hands on it, it is there for you. It's full, vibrant colour. Look, you can almost believe that that is Christ with a plate in front of him, can't you? I mean, yeah, the illusion is compelling. Or not, of course, and that is the point. I left in a little bit of text that the person who took this photo wrote, because he says, I'm not particularly religious, but did not have a problem with photographing this exhibit to share with others. Good art is good art. Good photography is good photography. This is neither. I do not believe that this exhibit was inspired by any film. This man is clearly a product of the United States education system. Okay. How many of your products are aspiring to be wax models of the Last Supper? How often is that what we're actually looking for? Something that's better than the real thing in some way, and we inadvertently just lose our connection to the experience that comes from that real thing. Instead of telling a story around it, we become disconnected from it. How often do we lose sight of the grounding in the physical world that doesn't go away, even in the most immersive screen-based experience? The fact is that everyone who ever touches or uses or goes through any of your narratives or stories lives, breathes, excretes. They are smelling and breathing and farting even while they're in your adventure. And those physical characteristics of their body, that grounding in the real, remains vitally important. It's how they experience it. Now there's one side of that discussion which is all about accessibility. The fact is, I don't like 3D films, not least because I've got a lazy left eye and I get a rubbish 3D experience with stereoscopy and get a headache as well. If I had perfect vision, would I like them more? I don't know. I suspect not, because they're dark and I'm a bit of a Mark Kermode on this, and I think it's not actually great technology. But the point is, I have a physical disability which makes it impossible for me accurately to evaluate. As I get older, my hands will shake more, my motor control will diminish, and I won't be able to play Twitch games. You know, my friend Alice, who's only in her 30s, is complaining already that her reflexes are starting to go, and the youngsters are starting to trash at first-person shooters. So, as we construct our stories, as we tell our stories, thinking about that wide range of human experience is going to become more and more important to addressing the widest possible audience. Because, you know, my son is 20, he's not going to stop playing the games as he gets older. He's just going to want different games to play and different technologies to play with. We're not going to give up these things. So how do we make all of those things work together? So on Tuesday, we had a fabulous time just listening to some of the best people in the world. Some of you are present here, I won't flatter you by name, talking about these issues. And what I want to do is just finish by pulling out some of the points that were made, and then you can build on that what you will. So Liz at the very start said, you need to put the role of audiences and how to capture attention right at the centre of what we're doing. Think user and audience first and platform and product second. Don't just leave it to marketing at the end. And this was a theme that came through again and again. That you can't just build something and then leave it to someone else to sell it or make it available or do things with it. When Ellen talked about the fact that his mother has no idea what he did for a living and thinks he builds movies but they use computers as well, he made a very important point in a very entertaining way. The fact that he managed to transform her understanding from you fix televisions to you fix computers was actually a step forward, because it expressed the fact that computers are slightly more interactive and it's not just television. But he talked a lot about the idea of the conduit. The conduit as a path to the audience. His 3 criteria: think about the title, think about the conduit, think about the audience. Now, conduits do not exist in a vacuum. Well, they might exist in a vacuum because they're in space, but conduits are part of a broader environment. The choice of channel implies there are channels to choose from. It implies there is a space within which you have to make decisions about the options from the various options. And that implies an understanding of that home environment, And as Ella pointed out, it takes time to move between these different conduits, from the printing press to the novel, from television to the sitcom. So whatever sort of storyteller you are, understanding where on the timeline of adoption the technologies you want to use sit becomes really quite crucial, really quite important. He also noted that the crossover between fiction and reality, which is used to drive a number of contemporary narratives and interactive dots, is a really dangerous thing. People wanting to be friends on Facebook with a fictional character and engage with them carries with it an emotional charge that needs to be handled in a way that somebody playing a first-person shooter or an Xbox game doesn't. And there becomes a moral responsibility to deal with the emotional connections that you create with that character going forward that I think hasn't yet adequately been addressed. So if we are going to engage, we think how to do that. Paola talked a lot about lean back. Paola Zicotti from Overworld talked about lean back versus lean forward. And what I wrote in my notes is that distinction seems to be breaking down, really, in that a tablet is a lean anywhere device. Stand up, sit down, whatever. You all have to accept, if you're making games for tablets and smartphones, that a significant proportion of your players are going to be engaging with the world while in the bathroom. But this is just happening, okay? There are people sitting there and they are engaging your games. And I suggest as research, you read the early chapters of Ulysses by James Joyce, for the famous scene where Leopold Bloom goes to the toilet, to give you an understanding of what's going on in the mind of someone, other than yourself, while those bodily processes are happening. So that's not lean back or lean forward, that's sit down. It's different. How do you engage in a world where this is a possibility for people? And I doubt there's been very much audience research done into those states of mind. We need to think about how that shifts the policies of engagement. And again, how it came back to this traversal between reality and fiction, theme that came up again and again and again. Where are the boundaries? Because of course, as storytellers, we want them to break down, but we're engaging with human beings where breaking down those barriers could have consequences. And also the danger of breaking them down is reality can intrude and get in the way of the story, because you can't control what's happening in the external reality of the person who is engaged with your story. So there's less in your control while telling the story, it can be less finely tuned. And in the ecology of content, where the art is being made out of existing material, as it so often is, how do you really make that work for an audience? She also talked beautifully, I thought, about the litro camera version of storytelling. The litro camera is this camera that actually takes, it captures the light field. Okay? An ordinary camera has a lens in it and it focuses at a certain focal length and takes an image, and that image is flat and captured. What's actually happening in the space around us is light waves are intersecting in complex ways. And with an appropriate array of micro lenses, you can capture that light field, and then you can focus it after the event. You capture it, and then using software, you can change the focal plane of the image. So I could take a photograph of this room and focus it forward, back, as I wanted. That's a brilliant metaphor for some forms of immersive storytelling, where you want people to be able to engage quite shallowly, but also get deeper and deeper. You want them to be able to focus on different elements of the story. Perhaps they'll come back to it at different times, repeat the story. Perhaps they'll just go through it once, but different people will have different experience. In that sense that the whole story frame exists at once is something which a number of people came back with. Paola also talked about, she showed the video of Nile Rodgers playing Get Lucky at Glastonbury, in which, when he was forced to stop because of copyright concerns, the audience filled in for him and sang along. And the phrase I wrote here in square brackets was, "Fucking rights holders will fuck it up if given half a chance." Which is, I think, just me speaking there. I wouldn't want to take that as a general principle, but it did seem to me to express a very deep and painful truth about the world in which we operate. Some of the constraints are not just artistic. Ingrid talked about the living in the age of the interfaces, as Manovich puts it, and asked how we tell stories when we go beyond the interface. And the philosopher in me at that point said, well, there's always an interface. It's just that some interfaces are more interfacing than others. And the question is whether it gets in the way. So the interface is the bit you notice, but there is always the way in which you interact. And how do you deal with that? And she then fantastically talked about the fact the audience has an audience. And how do you reach people with those stories? And that, I think, is a key, because the audience has an audience. Where does that audience sit? Who is watching them? And this brings us to this theme of the broader context and environment within which the stories are being told. That everyone who experiences a story, who's told a story, that changes them in some way. We tell the story so they will be changed. And that has ripples outside the people who heard or know or even are aware of the story. That going through some of the ARG games, for example, the alternate reality games, changes the people who played in ways that affects the people around them too. And we don't yet have ways adequately to think about that, or to consider how that could become reinforcing. So when two light waves interact, they can reinforce each other, they can cancel each other out. If we could build stories and narrative techniques that sent ripples out into the world from people to people who've never actually experienced the story, that would be very, very powerful. How might we do that deliberately instead of just accidentally? Because, of course, politics is the art of doing that. Politics is about creating ripples in people's understanding of the world by telling them stories that they are persuaded are true, even if they're not true. So could we take some of those techniques and use them for good instead of for politics? And that, I think, was interesting. Clint talked about linguistic frames and the ideas of how you might begin to measure and quantify and look at the way the stories spread outside the audience, but also how you could try to resonate with an audience by understanding them better, by appreciating the ways things are connected together and concepts are connected together. You can start to tell stories that you know will have more of an impact. And this focus on the quantitative as well as the qualitative was, I think, a deliberate choice on the part of Liz and Tish and the organisers, and it's a really important area. But it's one of those tools that needs to be handled very carefully, because it can very quickly, once you start thinking you are measuring something, that measurement becomes useless, because you end up creating work that just satisfies the measurement. This is as true in storytelling as it is in economic policy. If you have a measure like inflation and everything hinges on it, then the things you do in your economic policy are all about making the rate of inflation the right number. And as a result, you do things which throw millions of people out of work, which take away benefits from the disabled, which do enormously damaging things, but they don't matter because they're not being measured in the same way. Similarly, while the techniques that we heard about on Tuesday are important, they always have to complement the artistic impulse to tell the story in a particular way, and the understanding of technology in how you can tell that story. You know, the ninth rule of writing is always be willing to break the other 8 rules if you write something bad or stupid or just clumsy. Similarly, in storytelling, don't necessarily listen to the metrics and the measurement if your heart tells you you're doing the right thing to engage with people. Don't just do that. So whilst it's important to know about things like impact space, which was Flint's tool, and it is a really interesting tool, I suggest you look it up, it's not going to give you all of the answers. And then finally, actually, I suppose, is something that Locke said about the mission of the interactive documentaries, which is creative applications of technology to story and form. And that, of the whole day, was the thing that really resonated with me, and I hope with you. Because story and form made me think form and ground, made me think of art, made me think about how we look at pictures and how we analyse art into form and ground, and how that distinction is essentially arbitrary. about what consists of the background and what consists of the foreground, about what the object is and what the thing we're looking at, are choices we make. They're not inherent in a particular image, a particular work of art. And so it is with interactive documentaries. What's in the thing, what's in the work that you make, and what is brought to it by the affordances of the technologies that are available, but also by the hinterland, by the background of the people, the human beings who are engaging with it, becomes absolutely vital. And that is different for every member of the audience. Perhaps we're reaching the point now where the term audience becomes useless, redundant, becomes one of the things we have to give up. Because it is possible now to see an audience as being made up of individuals, each with their own characteristics, each with their own background and interest, and likes and dislikes and loves and sadnesses. Perhaps the piece of music you've chosen as a background track for a particular scene in a particular documentary will have enormous emotional resonance for somebody because it's the song that was playing while they broke up with their boyfriend, or it's the song they played at their mother's funeral. You can never know this. Of course, the technology may help you know that soon enough, but you can never really know this, and you can never plan for it, but you can have an awareness of it being a possibility. And you can think broader, go back to the very start of this, broader than just it's a product on a platform and somebody will sell it into a marketplace, and into that wider environment within which all of these works of art, whether they are fiction or documentaries or whatever, all these works of art exist and persist. And the thing that I felt most strongly about the whole day was some very good people grappling with these sorts of questions, understanding the context within which their work is being made, in all of its richness and complexity, and still trying to do the best work they could that would have value to people in their capacity as humans. Because in the end, all of these tools are ways that we as human beings tell stories to other human beings, and there isn't actually anything